the Kings and kind of their decisions. You know, I think right now we're still trying to figure out what the Kings' new identity is. You know, you're dealing with the head coach who's had to go through a lot of turmoil with the Kings roster changing, and you lose your best player after the coach gets fired, which is why you are now the coach. So you're looking at hopefully a run after the All-Star break, or starting tonight, really, but there's not a ton of time. And looking at Doug Christie and what he's done so far, I've been on record saying I just don't see a world where Doug Christie doesn't get and the interim tag removed at the end of the season. Maybe it's possible that happens, but to ask and answer the question, is there a world outside of Doug Christie? I still don't see it. I still don't see it. When I was watching the game and the games, and you see some of the you do see some of the blemishes, right? But Doug has continued to learn from them. That game against the Blazers, when Keon didn't close, a lot of people said, hey, maybe that would have been nice to have Keon there. And Doug comes out after this win that they get against the Pelicans, and he's being very open. And I think a lot of people like the transparency of, hey, the 6 guys right now that we have in our rotation. I don't think we'll be having conversation about LaRavia closing or anything like that, but those 6 guys and the rotation of those 6 guys, it's just going to have to be game by game. And, Keon, he can shoot the 3 ball, but offensively, obviously, he's nowhere near what DeMar DeRozan can do. So it's okay. Well, Malik is kind of rolling right now, so I think we can go with Keon tonight. Or if Malik isn't rolling, but DeMar is, do you think about putting in Keon instead of Malik? Probably not, because you need that playmaking. So it's really going to be, to me, a game-by-game thing where whatever, and I think Doug Christie would tell you the same thing, and that's why it's all part of this kind of read and react offense. It's kind of a microcosm of him just read and reacting to what the game is asking for and is calling for. So I don't know that we'll see a set, hey, because the whole thing with Kevin Huerter during that process, when he was kind of, the argument was, well, how is Kevin Huerter a starter, but he's not in the closing lineup, right? Now it's, well, this does make more sense at times, but it depends on what your team needs. If DeMar DeRozan, it doesn't really feel like you need DeMar and you need defense more so, then you got to go with Keon Ellis, right? I just don't see a world where you would pick Keon. When before they moved on from De'Aaron Fox, I could see a world where you pick to close with Keon instead of Malik, but you can't do that now. I don't see how you can do that.
Yeah, you can't have Keon versus Malik. The argument would be both of them on the floor at the same time, which I guess would take either LaVine or DeRozan off the floor in crunch time.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be DeRozan. It could be LaVine too.
Yeah, it's just we assume LaVine will be not a better player than DeMar DeRozan, but just that Zach LaVine should be on the floor down the stretch for a lot of these games.
He's getting paid, and I know he's still getting, entered and acclimated to the team, but yeah, you paying this brother nearly $50 million. He's got to close.
Yeah, for sure. And so this is the interesting part about that from Doug's standpoint. I think to your original question, though, about the Doug Christie, is there a world outside of Doug Christie for the Kings? I think there's a very narrow path there, and that is only if they decide to clear house in the front office this offseason, and Vivek and Matina and the people running the team give the new general manager leeway to decide who the new coach is. Because what I would imagine, and maybe for better or for worse, is if they did move on from the front office, they would instill Doug as the coach and say to the GM, you can come in and do what you want with the team, but Doug is going to be the coach. And that would be the only path I see to it, because other than that, 1, Doug is beloved within the organization. 2, they've been putting up a winning record despite all of the turbulence that's happened with him as the interim coach. Now a completely new roster coming in as well. So I understand that it's very, very likely Doug will be the coach going forward. However, there is a path, I feel like, to him not being the coach, for better or for worse.
And let's not forget what Dave also said on Friday about that conversation with De'Aaron when the whole thing came up about Mike Brown being asked to move on from one of the assistant coaches, and Dave didn't want to get into who that was. So now if you're Doug, that's out, right? So the end of this season, you will now, I guess, revamp and get different assistant coaches. But what if you made the playoffs? I don't know if that still stands, even with Mike Brown out now. It's not it's messy. I wouldn't call it a mess, but it definitely is messy.
And there's also the reports that, I mean, I would assume Doug would have to build out his own coaching staff. It's just the question of which of the guys that were Mike Brown hires will want to stick around after, because I know there's been reports this week with Leonard Hamilton retiring at the end of the year at Florida State that Luke Laux is in line to be the next head coach at Florida State. And so that's been up in the air, and there's all sorts of different, paths forward. So they might have to build out a new coaching staff, but Doug also has only ever coached in Sacramento, so he doesn't have those relationships outside of the league. And that's not prohibitive. I mean, Jordy and Mike never had much of a relationship before Jordy became the associate coach, but it's just one of those things that you think about when you talk about what direction are the Kings going after the season ends, regardless of play in or play off or the 11 seed or whatever happens.